So in my past videos, I've lectured to you the most common shadow castings used for architecture. Now let's try to do a bit of these exercises. Probably you could download the image file of this and print it out onto, let's say, marker paper or ordinary paper for pencils, shadings. Particularly, I'm using the Winsor & Newton pigment marker. Okay, you can use Copic or any brand. So I have the 5 different cool grays, 1, 2, 5, and plus I have an additional black, and then I have a colorless blender that I'm going to be using to blend. And then I'm going to be using colored pencils. Okay, this is basic Prismacolor for indicating where my shadow line direction is, my light direction for yellow. I'm going to be using these. I'm going to be using blue for vertical line. First, we need to establish what values are going to be used for shading later on. I'm going to be using my 0.6 Unipin pen to construct very fast rectangles. Do this, have space here, have space here. These are like something like in 1 inch, and this is roughly about more than an inch. I'm going to cut this into 8 segments. So I'm going to do some light lines to segment them into 8 equal parts. I'm going to start with cool gray 1. So it's the lightest. And I'm going to go on and move until this upper second rectangle. And I'm going to be switching to number 2. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to increase the value. Okay, so I can go on to the next rectangle. So I'm overlapping these things together. But the goal here is to have this as your darkest. So I could probably put in the black as my goal. But I want to transition this in such a way. Okay, so I'm applying this by zigzagging motion. So we could see a bit of the strokes here. So it's not perfect. So this is one of the disadvantage of having marker pens, that you could probably see these things, the strokes. So that's the darkest. I mean, that's the darkest value that we're going to get the last part. What I'm going to do here is I want to wait for a few minutes before I'm going to shade this another layer because it's not dry. But I'm going to go back to the second and third. You can see that the values are kind of close, or even this one's a bit darker. So I'm going to go and get my number 2, cool gray number 2. I'm going to place in another layer so that it's consistent. Okay, I'm going to do that so that they're not too far apart of value. Okay, so the goal here is to make some step values so that you could reference it later on onto your shading of the shadow casting and the shading of surfaces of the cube. So this is a bit dry now. So I'm going to go back with my number 5. Just to separate this from this third to the last rectangle. One disadvantage of using markers is this, that you could see the strokes, not so much noticeable in the first values here or the lighter values. I mentioned the colorless blender here. Okay, I've been using this for a bit, and if I try to do this, okay, so there's a bit of ink from before as I've been using this to blend the grays, and you could probably smooth it out, but it's picking up some of the not dry yet. You can lighten up some parts of it, but it can't really give you that very smooth blend, but rather it picks up some of the grays, and you can see. Okay, I'm gonna try to achieve sort of like a smoother blending of sorts. Okay, I'm trying to erase those overlapping lines, but this is as far as I can go with this. You can learn to sort of like control it a bit, but it's not entirely going to be smooth. Unlike the mediums of like watercolor, this is like a value system that you're going to be using to later on use for shading and the casting of the shadows, shading it up. Once you have taken a look at the tutorial that in the past, now you can do the construction of the shadow casting for this simple cube. You can always review the past tutorial, but the focus here now is to apply the shading and rendering all the shadings of the surfaces. So the light source is coming from this side. So the lightest, and so there are three surfaces that are next after the lightest being this behind this face. It would be the second lightest face would be the top. Get my cool gray one. That's one. I'm applying it to there. But what I'm trying to next get is this value. So I'm trying to make this as smooth as possible by zigzagging or having a S motion. The value that I want to achieve next would be something like here. So when you're trying to render something like this, first you try out the lightest and then you go on to the darker valued markers. I'm trying to be as careful. Okay, so let's do that one more time. Just like a watercolor, I'm trying to put in, push the pigment onto these corners, so you can see the results. The number two is too light, or number one rather. It's a bit too light. It looks like the whiteness of the paper. Probably I could put a number two again, a number two, and apply that. Okay, that's a bit smoother. And now I can increase the value of this face by applying another layer. Now this face fronting looks a bit too matching to the ones I placed here. So I'm just going to be getting number 4. Okay. And I want to increase the value of this, probably to match this, because this is the opposite of where the light is coming from. So therefore, this is a bit darker, the darkest of the three. I think I overdid this. Okay, carefully. Okay. I think I need to stop, or I don't want to give too much value or too dark. Then what I can do here is I'm going to get my colorless blender, probably pick up some of the pigments and push some of the pigments in. Oops. I'm just using the tip of this. Now I'm looking at this and I'm seeing that, this is the top surface has dried a bit, and now it's matching sort of like this. These are too close to each other. So I'm going to be getting number 3 again. And probably I'd like to place in another layer so that to differentiate between the two surfaces. Where's this at? Somewhere there. Try to match that. That's it. Touch the edge and try to as much as possible. Try to make it smooth. Apply smooth. It mimics sort of like this messy watercolor that you can apply. But the advantage of the marker medium is that you don't need to have water, so it's all in the pen. So once this is done, now I can go on to rendering the shadow cast. So the outline is specifically plotted. So I'm going to be using number 5. I'm going to outline first the outer edges of that shadow cast, and then I work my can switch to the finer tip. Okay. Outer edge. Need to contrast this against this darker face here. So be careful of touching the area here that are still wet. So I made a big mistake there. It went over. So that's how you can apply basic shadow and shading. For my students, once you've done this first exercise and with the value here, write what sort of shadow casting. Of course, write your name, and of course, you can title this marker value scale. So just to indicate what values did you try to use, close to this would be this. And then shadow. That's the way you can do this. So indicate so that we could see what values you use for this shadow casting shading exercise. Now, if you want to need to darken it a bit more, you can always you always can use a colored pencil. Now make sure that these are already dried. The way I'm coloring this is with these strokes. Okay, the strokes that I am implementing are something like this. So I not broad strokes, but rather more of this. And if I want, and I need to color a bigger area or shade a bigger area, it would be something like that. So if you don't have any markers, by the way, you can always have your strokes like this. Okay. Instead of doing broad strokes, all right, that's the basic shading and shadow casting shading of surfaces exercise. So that's the basic cube. In the video description, you could probably download this type of a cube, so I have a model of this. So basically, it's the same as sort of like the cube that I first showed, except that it's hollow, except for the 3 faces out of the 6, and then it has a column that is exposed, and 2 beams are being exposed. So it has this form. Of course, it's a bit more complex than the plain cube. You could practice first the light source being in a parallel to the picture plane, and then print out this, and you can practice the light source coming from the front of the viewer, and you can project it along with what's going to happen inside here, the hollow space. And what if the sun source or light source or distant light is going to be coming from the back of the viewer, and therefore the shadow casting would be somewhere there, and this column is going to be here, and then the beams should be projected somewhere there. Very important. If you are going to be working with marker pens, therefore you need to print this out onto a marker pen friendly paper, or else it's going to also to keep in mind that you should be printing on the correct surface or side to avoid the ink from going through the paper. So I'm going to try my marker on an ordinary paper, for example this one. So it's going to go through. Paper for marker pens will not. So even the darkest cannot go through, because it's specially formulated for marker pens. Hoping that you will have a fun time trying out these renderings. So until the next time again, bye.